So without further delay, please let me introduce Jay Parikh, Microsoft EVP for the Core AI division.
Good morning.
Morning.
Ooh, how is everyone?
All right. So let me start with an interesting question about the past. So you were part of the team that created this series of conference that we call Atscale. So can you describe a bit to us, like what was the background, what was the intent in those days, what were we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe this was circa 2012, 2013. And there was like a series of conferences in the industry. When going to some of these conferences repeat year after year, some of them were like really good, really deeply technical. They were small. And then they all started to get big and they kind of got commercialized. And then some of them, I remember going to the expo center and it was vendors pitching vendors. And at that moment I came back and I was like, this is not really fun anymore for engineers. So then we started to brainstorm. It was like, what if we created a specialized conference? What would we do? Like, what would be the principles behind creating something like this? The other thing, too, about a lot of the conferences in the industry at the time were they were trying to bridge this weird gap between being relevant for IT enterprise, but also be relevant for sort of startup, distributed systems, and scale. And they kind of mix the messages, right? And so the three things that we wanted to accomplish, Francois, was one, we wanted to have focus in a conference. So we wanted to really focus in on the challenges and the technology and the pace that it takes to build scale systems, right? And it's not just designing, it's building these things, it's operating these things, performance, security, et cetera, right? So that was one, is like really focus on sort of scale engineering. Number two was we wanted it to be for engineers, by engineers, right? We wanted it to stay really, really technical, and we wanted to get back to showing code or live demos or talking about incidents on stage and sharing these practices. And then third, we wanted it to be open. We wanted everybody that comes to this community to share, right? And it wasn't something here we wanted to be closed. We wanted to build the community around these two things. So that was the three things. One, focus on scale. Two, make it deeply technical. And three, build an open community. So, and here we are.
That's great.
10, 11, 12 years later.
Yes. One of the things that I've noticed, and this is probably something that we put in place in the last few years, it's actually the storytelling. Like, we have a lot of good feedback for people that are coming in and telling the story of the system itself. Because let's be honest, we try something and the first shot, usually it doesn't work. Even the second and the third. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It always works the first time.
It's only like after years of digging and trying and doing it again and evolving that you get to a point where, okay, MySQL actually works now. Yeah. It's great.
Well, and I think that's where the open part of this is, right? Where there might be some people who are still not thinking it works, but I think that's where the open part of this is, where if the community here can be sharing how these different systems in different companies are evolving, then coming up that learning curve of building these systems together is going to happen faster for everyone.
Yes. Awesome. This is great. Happy to be continuing the series. All right. Let's talk about...
You know what I say about continuing the series, so...
Let's talk about lesson from Hyperscale. You've been through many companies, many iterations. So what are the big lessons from putting systems together, but also putting organizations that are actually working and then scaling it, because there's a lot of users out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one where it's just constant learning, right? And over my career, I've been obviously just super, I think, blessed and humbled to work with some of the most incredible people, incredible teams on some amazingly hard challenges. And I think there's just a myriad of different learning experiences. I would say maybe to highlight a few. First one I would probably say when people ask me, hey, give me some advice on how to scale, like scale really quickly. And not that I give advice, but one of the things I've learned to talk about with folks is that basically expect, if you're growing really fast, which is a mark of success, product market fit, et cetera, you should expect everything in your organization, in your technology to fail multiple times. And, it's sort of a mindset shift because a lot of humans, when you're scaling really fast, kind of sit back and you're surprised when stuff breaks. But you really shouldn't be surprised. Right now, over time, if you have the right team, the right telemetry, you're learning through incident reviews and those types of things, you're going to be able to respond, or maybe you'll be able to see around the corners a little bit better than just always being surprised by things. But the more that I would say culturally, you're geared to anticipate or expect the failures from scale, then you build a culture that knows how to be curious about this, that knows how to get there and fix things, but not just keep incrementally fixing things, because if you're scaling really fast, at some point you have to take a step back and say, hey, how do we build something that's going to be 10x better? And that is a parallel effort, et cetera, et cetera. So one is you kind of embrace the breakage, right? And you don't want to thrash, but you want to learn from that. Number two, I would say also counterintuitive, that really smart systems engineers, what I've learned, including myself, are really good at making things more complicated to scale things, right? And we find all sorts of fancy algorithms, other microservices, weird dependencies, and we keep adding because we're trying to solve that problem, either feature or performance or something like that. The problem is over time, when you build up all of the things around a system, it becomes this complex system that you can't reason about. And when something goes wrong, it's very fractal in breakage, right? And it's very hard to anticipate things. It's very hard to prevent things. How do you alert on these things? How do you deploy things safely? So the thing I've learned is kind of this constant pressure as you're going up from a scaling perspective. The people building the systems are going to build more stuff. They're going to write more code. They're going to create more complexity. So there has to be this ethos in the culture to simplify things as well, right? And I remember one such incident, well, many, when we were here at Facebook, now Meta, where we had built this, big system. It had all of these ancillary services, and we had this cascading failure one day. And it was like all of these things kind of just lined up, took a bunch of things down. It became very hard to bring the system back up. And one of the things that we did post-incident as we reviewed this was, hey, maybe we should consolidate some of these services. Maybe we should get rid of some of these things all independent that needed to be managed from a capacity perspective, a release perspective, an observability perspective. So it was actually trying to decomplexify, declutter the system so that we could actually scale it better from that point on.
Let me dig a bit on the minimalistic kind of reducing the amount of component, because this is something that I'm struggling with. There's always incentive to create, that new system that will save the world and then be 10 times better. So how do you balance these two things about, there's a point where you cannot evolve the current system, and it's kind of not easy to judge. And then now you need to do something else. So how do you balance these things about, okay, we have to stay minimal. How do you create the culture to stay minimal while you're still offer that there's a point that, hey, the rewrite is needed?
Yeah, and I think it's trying to get that point, right? Because you can oftentimes go too far and the system is just fragile and you're thrashing as a team and you can't really get out of jail, so to speak, right? And then there's a point where if you're just constantly blowing up a system and rebuilding it from scratch, then that's also not right. So some part of it is just experience, Francois, I think. Two is then just making sure culturally, whether it be once a quarter or twice a year or something like that, where every major service team has maybe an hour or two to just zoom out, right? And kind of in some ways have that forced amnesia exercise, which is hey, if we were to just come into the system today and know what we know about the metrics, about the system, is there a way to declutter this thing? Is there a way to simplify things? Is there a way to remove alerts or to simplify our rollout procedures or to like release faster or something like that? But I think having that and just constantly there in, maybe it's not on the windshield as you're driving the car, but it's kind of in the side view mirrors that you're always looking at that, seeing if there's something that you should be avoiding or steering a different path. The other thing too, and it's hard, right, because everybody's got too much work to do and not enough people on the team and capital and stuff like that, but be curious to potentially have these hackathons where you can prototype an alternate version of the system just to kind of explore what the art of the possible is, right? Because the technology in the organization around you and the technology in the world is constantly evolving, right? What's in open source, what you can learn from the community here, for example, will always have you reevaluate what that objective function should be for your service.
The curiosity is a great point. I think, like, taking the time to figure out what could be the alternative without fully implementing it, and then going deeper in the details.
One of the other things I just add, because we obviously have a culture, I think many of us have a culture around incident reviews, right? So doing postmortems, whatever we call it. But one of the things that we would see in my career and all the places I've been is keeping track of sort of the chronic breakage in a service. When you see a particular service just have an ongoing steady state of issues, and they're not exactly all the same, but there is this like threshold has kind of gotten to a certain point where the thing is just really fragile, right? And there's just chronic breakage in the team. And that, as a leader, the tech lead, the manager as a team, if you have that sort of repeat chronic breakage and sort of just probably a couple of months of heightened instability, that means there's probably something that you need to reevaluate. Either the team isn't working well, some of the procedures are not right, the technology's hitting its sort of brittle edge, and those should all go into that kind of forced amnesia exercise.
Great. I'm going to go off script a little bit since you mentioned incident review. You were part of the team that created what we call, like in infra at Meta, the main sev review, like the tradition.
My favorite meeting of the week.
Since you left for other adventures, have you been able to recreate
100%.
that?
100%. And remember that the incident process here at Facebook, when I joined in 2009, I brought with me from other companies, right? So it is something that is, I think, super important for a highly technical team to have this learning loop back in terms of being able to debrief what's happening, and it's not just the technology. Debriefs are important for lots of other parts of running a business. So, when I left Facebook and went to the startup and now at Microsoft, we have always had this, wherever I am, I always have this because I think it's so important for all of us to learn. And I think it just ultimately, even though it takes time to do a proper sev review, as you know, writing out all the reports, getting all the data, organizing the meetings, doing all the follow-up item, I actually think doing that regularly, it's like brushing your teeth, right? It's like you brush your teeth twice a day, floss once a day. Chances are your dentist appointment's going to be better than if you try to brush 20 times the day before a dentist appointment, right? And so I think it's just really important to build that into the culture because ultimately you're going to get smarter faster and you're going to go faster as a team by getting the signal back into your roadmap.
Thank you for this. So now let's move a little bit on the hot topic of the day, AI.
I thought you were going to ask me about my favorite.
So we had a conversation between Mark and Satya last week.
They were here, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's in this room, but with different stage.
Yeah.
What are, from your point of view, they spoke about it at a high level, what we can do from a product perspective, but what are the systems challenge that you see that, that your team right now needs to tackle? What are the patterns and...
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot. I think it's a super exciting time. It's definitely a very energizing period for us in our Core AI team at Microsoft as well. So we started the Core AI team back in January of this year, a couple of months after I joined Microsoft. And our remit really is, from a mission perspective, is to empower every developer and eventually everyone to shape the future with AI. Now, it's a broad remit, but what we're doing differently in this organization and where these challenges come together for us is, one is the old world of building apps is quickly changing, right? And so from, say, a few years ago, for many decades, we've thought about building software in very deterministic applications. We go out there, talk to a customer in the enterprise world, get some requirements, we'd come back, we'd come up with a database schema, we'd write some crufty code around it, and then we'd put some UX, UI around it, right, or on top of it. And I'm oversimplifying it, but largely a lot of value in the world was created by that rough system of building an application. But now as you kind of move into this AI world, into this LLM world, now at the core of the application is something that actually is thinking, it's reasoning, it's planning. It can go off script. It can do a bunch of things really fast. It could solve problems that many humans can't solve because it has all of this knowledge and access to all of these tools. And it can go through a lot of permutations super fast if it's well built. So at the heart of the application no longer is kind of this database schema plus some business logic. At the heart of the application now is this thing that can think and reason and plan. And now you have to hook in the data, you have to hook in evals, you have to look in scaffolding, and then the application and how these agents talk to each other. So the entire way that we're having to think about building applications, both for supporting inside of Microsoft, so we call them first party, and then all of our customers who are using Microsoft's AI services, third party, we have to rethink what that entire infrastructure is, that platform, and the tools that developers will use or builders will use to build these AI or agentic applications, right? So challenges that we have, one is obviously scale. Because we have a myriad of really big first-party customers, and then we have a myriad of external customers to Microsoft who use Azure, who use lots of other parts of the Microsoft stuff. So scale, big part of the problem. Number two is, I would say, now because we have almost 2,000 models in our model catalog, and there are definitely models that are favorite, but what we're seeing is now enterprises are moving on from just simple chatbots, and they want to do more sophisticated workflows, or kind of almost like a digital employee that they're hiring, and that employee is doing and automating work that humans used to do in the past. But how do you orchestrate that thing? How do you program that thing? How do you make sure it's correct? Then security, compliance part of it, right? And then another part is now, how do these agents hook into and access your enterprise data? Because that's where the smart, the intelligence, the outcomes, the valuable outcomes are delivered, right? So scale, I would say broadly observability, but it includes new things like evals, right? Then there's things like model choice, model tuning, and what you do with your data, and distillation, fine-tuning, kind of all the post-training stuff that's really unlocking the value in these agentic or agent use cases.
Is that your gut feeling that with this new model where you lose a little bit of stuff that used to be deterministic? And is your gut feeling that you need a lot more observability in these cases to make sure that it stays on track?
I would say it's different observability, right? And I don't know that it's a lot more, because the way we would observe kind of a traditional caching system or MySQL or something like that, it requires a lot of observability, right? These things are not something where we just have a cookie cutter way to manage these things. So I think that the signals that we get from these agentic applications or agents kind of running in the enterprise or running in the wild, as some of us deal with on a daily basis, that the signals that you get there, because some of these signals are there for security, for compliance reasons, for correctness reasons. Some of the signals that you get back, you want to actually use to further post-train the model, because then the outcomes will get better for your business, right? So there's multiple ways that this observability data, and frankly, I think it's changing really fast right now. So part of the challenge we have in building the platform, building the team also that we're building the platform, is to figure out how to dissect all of these different observability challenges that are there. But it's fun, and we're working with a ton of customers to ideate, to iterate on this.
Awesome. All right. As we wrap up, I'm looking for advice on what would you do with the Atscale conference to evolve it, and then looking in the future, like how can we make it better? How can we support this new application model?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say first, just given the mention I had at the beginning of the talk here, one is like really make sure that it stays a conference for engineers by engineers. Right, I think that's what's so special about this conference all around the world, and is just like really making sure that it stays about it, the technical challenges, the operational challenges, sharing kind of the cultural, how these organizations, how you all think about operating, and really making sure you tell the stories because I think telling the stories is also a way where people can relate to these challenges, right? So I say don't lose that, because I think once it becomes commercialized or it becomes too much marketing, then I think lots of people probably here won't come. So don't do that. Number two is I would say is stay open. I think it does really require everybody here to volunteer, right? To give talks, to share, to engage in open source. I think the folks that come here and can give back to the community, that allows the community to continue to thrive, continue to grow. And number three is really start to figure out how to share more about these systems and reliability challenges and observability challenges, security, for these new category of applications, right? Because we really haven't not even scratched the surface of what's going to happen in this shift from these distributed systems and applications we've been building for decades to now what the enterprise, what companies are going to be building in the years, decades to come.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's good to see you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.